Your business should know what happens next. A practical core systems field guide for real estate business owners. Conversions, operations, retention, experiences. A companion resource to Built on Core. Read for clarity. Build with real work. This field guide is organized to move from diagnosis into action. Read the foundation chapters first, then use the core chapters to examine one real part of your business. The final system, C.O.R.E and 7-day test help you turn one decision into a small, observable implementation. Chapter 1, start here. Why this work matters and how to use the guide honestly. Chapter 2, the real systems problem. The difference among stored information, reminders, automation, and a dependable system. Chapter 3, the core diagnostic. How to score the business using evidence and find the first constraint. Chapter 4, the core operating model. How conversion, operations, retention, experience, and routines work as one journey. Chapter 5, the intelligence behind the system. The proper roles of SAM, AI, intelligence, knowledge, and human judgment. Chapter 6, conversions. Positioning, lead magnets, capture, response, follow-up, qualification, and consultation. Chapter 7, operations. Buyer, seller, listing, transaction, milestone, communication, and exception systems. Chapter 8, retention. Closing handoffs, relationship context, annual reviews, repeat, referral, and reactivation. Chapter 9, experiences. How to reduce uncertainty and design clarity into every stage. Chapter 10, routines. How approved decisions become repeatable action without removing judgment. Chapter 11, system C.O.R.E and 7-day test. A practical way to build, test, review, and improve one process. Chapter 12, what happens next? How coached implementation connects the entire business through Built on Core. Working rule, do not try to redesign the entire business while reading. Choose one real process, make the next step clear, test the smallest useful version, and improve what the evidence shows. A note from Mark. I want to begin with the reason this work matters to me, because it goes back much further than SAM or Built on Core. More than 36 years ago, my original business partner, Peggy Mitchell, was one of the top real estate agents in the Midwest for Coldwell Banker. Before real estate, Peggy had been a nurse. She entered the business believing it would give her more time with her family. Instead, the business consumed her time, followed her home, and made her feel as if she was always behind. I remember asking Peggy why she was willing to share so much of her business with me. She told me she was overworked, constantly trying to take care of her clients, and had almost no time left for herself or her family. The part that stayed with me was not how many homes she sold or how successful she looked from the outside. It was what the business was costing her and her daughter, Amber. That conversation changed the direction of my work because I realized Peggy did not have an effort problem, a knowledge problem, or a problem caring about her clients. She had a systems problem. The business could not reliably carry the work unless she carried it herself. Once you understand that problem, you begin to see it everywhere in real estate. I have met very successful agents who close a great number of transactions, but still serve as the alarm system for the entire business. The next phone call, the inspection deadline, the client update, the lead that needs another attempt, and the past client who should hear from them are all being held together by memory. From the outside, the business looks productive. From the inside, The owner knows that if they stop checking, reminding, and pushing, something important may stop with them. That is sometimes described as a time management problem, a discipline problem, or a delegation problem. Those things may play a part, but they do not get to the root of it. A working system gives the business a clear answer to a few practical questions. What real event starts the process? What should happen next? Who owns that next step? When should it happen? What information does that person need? And what will prove the work was completed? Until those decisions are clear, a checklist is just a list, and an automation can make an unclear process run faster without making it run better. This is what I mean when I say your business should know what happens next. I do not mean that software should run your business without you, or that artificial intelligence should make important decisions on your behalf. I mean that you should not have to remake the same decision every time a familiar event occurs. When a new inquiry arrives, an agreement is signed, an offer is accepted, an inspection is scheduled, a transaction closes, or a past client reaches an important milestone, the business should already know the standard you want followed. Your people and your technology should be able to carry that decision forward while you remain available for the judgment, advice, exceptions, and personal conversations that actually need you. Here's the thing I do not want us to lose as we talk about AI and automation. Real estate is still a relationship business. People want to work with people, especially when they are making a decision that affects their money, their family, and where they will live. Our philosophy with Sam has never been to cut you off from your client. The purpose of the technology is to prepare the work, organize the details, bring the right context forward, and help you notice what needs attention so you have more time to be with the people you serve. A good system should make the business more personal because it gives you room to listen and respond instead of spending that time trying to remember what you missed. That is why this guide is organized around C.O.R.E, conversions, operations, retention, and experiences. These are not four marketing labels or four separate parts of the business. Conversion determines how an opportunity is received, understood, followed, and advanced. Operations carries the promises you made into the buyer, seller, listing, transaction, and closing work. Retention makes sure closing is not treated as the end of the relationship. Experience improves how people feel, what they understand, and how confidently they move through every one of those stages. Routines connect those areas by turning a meaningful event into a visible next action with an owner, timing, context, and a way to confirm the result. I also do not want this to be one of those guides that tells you to follow up, communicate well, and provide great service, then acts as if it has taught you how to build a system. You already know those things matter. The useful work begins when we define what they mean in a real business. How quickly should a lead hear from you, and what happens if they do not respond? Which parts of a listing process should always occur, and which require judgment? What information must move from conversion into active client service? What should happen at closing so the relationship continues naturally? At which moments is a client most likely to feel uncertain, and what should your business do before that uncertainty turns into a problem? Those are the kinds of decisions we are going to work through in this guide. As you read, keep your actual business in front of you. Do not answer the questions based on the business you wish you had or the process you think you are supposed to have. Choose a real lead source, a real client process, a recent closing, or a moment that regularly creates confusion. Write down what currently happens, including the parts that still depend on you remembering or stepping in. Then decide what should happen. Put the smallest useful version into SAM and test it with real work. The first test may show you that the timing is wrong, the owner is unclear, the message does not fit, or an important exception was missed. That is not failure. That is how a system becomes dependable. I am going to give you the best thinking I can in these pages. I do not believe the useful parts should be held back so the guide can become a long sales pitch. You should be able to use what you learn here to make a meaningful improvement on your own. The difference between this guide and Built on C.O.R.E is not that we keep the important ideas secret. The difference is implementation inside the program. We help you make the hard decisions, put them to work in SAM, test them against real business activity, review the evidence, correct what is not working, and stay with the process long enough for it to become part of the way your business operates. My goal for you is bigger than building a cleaner database or creating a few automations. I want you to have a business that takes good care of people, follows through on opportunities, gives your team a clear way to work, and does not require you to carry every open loop into your evenings, weekends, family time, or vacations. We are not going to rebuild the whole business at once. We are going to start with one important process, answer what should happen next, and make that answer visible enough to use, test, and improve. That is how a better business begins, and it is the reason I have spent so many years doing this work. Mark Stepp, co-founder and CTO, Workflow Secrets, Chief Engineer of SAM. The real systems problem: a database can store the work without running it. Most real estate businesses do not break because the owner has no information. In fact, the opposite is often true. The business has contact records, emails, text messages, calendar appointments, transaction dates, checklists, templates, notes, and years of experience. The problem is that the information is spread across too many places, and the connection between the information and the next action still depends on someone noticing what changed. Think about what happens after a busy day of appointments. A new lead arrived while you were driving. A seller sent a question by text. An inspection response deadline was added to an email thread. A past client mentioned that a parent may be moving closer to the family. Every one of those details may have been recorded somewhere. That does not mean the business knows what to do with them. Unless the next action has an owner, a useful time, the right context, and a way to confirm completion, the work is still waiting for a person to turn information into action. That distinction is important because software can create a false sense of security. An agent may say, "It is in my CRM," when what they mean is that the contact exists. A team may say, "It is on the checklist," when nobody is responsible for checking whether the step applies to this client or has been completed. A task can be sitting on a calendar while the information needed to perform it is buried in an email. An automated message can be scheduled even though the client's situation has changed and that message no longer makes sense. The record exists, but the business is not actually carrying the work. Storage, reminders, automation, and systems are not the same thing. A database answers, what do we know? It can hold the contact, property, transaction, dates, communications, and history. That information is valuable, but storage alone is passive. It does not decide what should happen because a new fact was added or a business condition changed. A reminder answers, what did somebody tell us to remember? Reminders are useful for one-time work and personal commitments. They become fragile when the same type of reminder must be created manually every time the same type of event occurs. If the owner has to remember to create the reminder has not removed the dependency on memory. It has only moved the dependency to an earlier point in the process. An automation answers, what action should repeat when this trigger occurs? Automation can create a task, prepare or send a communication, assign work, change a status, schedule a future action, or start another part of a process. It can create enormous consistency, but it does exactly what it was told to do. It cannot repair an unclear standard, settle a disagreement over ownership, or decide that a sensitive client situation should be handled differently unless those conditions and boundaries have been considered. A system answers a larger question. How should this part of the business work from beginning to end? A system includes the decision that defines the standard, the event that starts the work, the person or role responsible for it, the timing, the information required, the normal path, the exceptions that need judgment, the client communication, and the evidence that shows whether the desired result occurred. The software supports the system, but the system is the business decision made visible and repeatable. This is why buying a CRM does not automatically give an agent a business system. The software may provide fields, pipelines, templates, routines, and reporting, but it cannot know the promises you want to make, the service level you want to provide, the relationships you want to protect, or where you want human judgment to remain unless you define those things. The tool can carry a decision. It cannot make an undefined business clear simply because the feature exists. What a dependable system must contain. Every dependable system begins with a real event. Follow up better is not an event. A website inquiry being received is an event. A buyer agency agreement being signed is an event. A listing date being selected, an offer being accepted, an inspection being scheduled, and a transaction being marked closed are events. The more clearly the starting event can be observed, the less the process depends on interpretation or memory. The system must also define an outcome. Take care of the lead is not a useful outcome because two people can interpret it differently. The inquiry receives a personal first response, is assigned to an owner, has a current stage, and has a dated next action, is observable. An outcome does not need to guarantee that the person will respond or become a client. It needs to define what the business is responsible for doing. Ownership must be specific enough that two people cannot both assume the other person has it. An owner can be a named person or a clearly defined role, but the business should know who is responsible before the work becomes late. The owner also needs the authority and information to complete the action. Assigning a task to an assistant does not create delegation if the assistant must call the agent to ask what to say, which standard applies, or whether they have permission to proceed. Timing should be based on the moment when the action is useful, not simply on what is convenient to schedule. A lead response may need to occur within minutes. A seller update may need to occur after a specific showing, at the end of a defined reporting period, or when a meaningful change occurs. A past client contact may be tied to a home anniversary, a life event, or the time when an annual real estate review would be valuable. Good timing is part of the service standard, not merely a due date. The process must carry enough context for the person completing the action to understand what is happening. A task that says, "Call John," is not a system. The caller should know why the call matters, what happened previously, what promise was made, what question remains open, and what the desired next step is. This is where connected records, communication history, client preferences, and business knowledge become useful. The goal is not to collect more data. The goal is to make the right information available at the moment it affects the work. Finally, the business needs evidence. A completed task may be evidence that an action occurred, but it is not always evidence that the process worked. If the goal was to provide a client update, the evidence might be that the message was approved and sent the call was completed or the client's question was resolved. If the goal was to prevent a lead from disappearing, the evidence might be that the contact has an owner, a current stage, a documented response history, and a future next action. Evidence makes the process visible enough to review instead of relying on a general feeling that the team is probably doing it. The 4 forms of owner dependency. When work depends too heavily on the owner, the cause usually falls into one of 4 categories. The first is memory dependency. The owner is the person who remembers the deadline, notices the missing follow-up, or knows that a client should receive an update. The second is knowledge dependency. Someone else may know that work is required, but the explanation, standard, client history, or next step exists only in the owner's head. The third is decision dependency. The team has information but cannot act because the owner has never defined the rule or boundary that would allow a normal situation to move forward. The fourth is permission dependency. A team member understands the process but has not been given the authority to complete it without asking. Those dependencies feel similar because they all result in the owner being interrupted. They require different solutions. A missing reminder may be solved by a routine. Missing knowledge may require a documented standard, example, or explanation. An undefined decision requires the owner to choose how the business should operate. A permission problem requires clear boundaries that say what a team member or system may do, what needs review, and what must be escalated. Automating all 4 as if they were memory problems usually creates more confusion. A real estate example, the accepted offer. Suppose a seller accepts an offer on Friday afternoon. The contract and important dates are in the transaction file. The agent knows an inspection will need to be scheduled. Earnest money must be confirmed. The seller needs an explanation of what comes next, and several people must receive information. The transaction coordinator has a checklist. On the surface, it looks as if the process is covered. Now ask what actually causes the process to begin. Does changing the listing or transaction status create the work, or does somebody have to remember to send the contract to the coordinator? Who confirms that the important dates were entered correctly? Who prepares the seller update, and when should the seller receive it? Which steps always occur, which depend on the contract, and which require the agent's judgment? What happens if the inspection is scheduled before the routine expects it? How does the business confirm that the client received the explanation and does not have an unanswered question? The checklist may contain every task and still leave those decisions unanswered. A dependable accepted offer system would use a visible event to start the common process, bring the contract and client context into the work, assign the standard actions, prepare the expected communication, identify the steps that need human review, and surface exceptions rather than treating every transaction as identical. The agent is still responsible for advice, negotiation, risk, and the relationship. The system prevents the agent from having to personally remember and launch every repeatable part. The 30-day absence test. You do not need to disappear for 30 days to learn where the business depends on you. You can use the possibility as a test. Imagine that you could answer true emergencies but could not provide daily reminders, search for missing information, or approve ordinary work. Then work through the following sequence with your actual business in mind. Name the work that would slow down or stop. Choose specific processes, not departments. Lead follow-up after the first conversation, preparing a new listing for launch, and moving a closed client into long-term follow-up are useful. Marketing and transactions are too broad. Identify why the work needs you. Decide whether the dependency is memory, knowledge, an undefined decision, or permission. More than one may be present, but identify the first one that prevents the work from moving. Describe the consequence. Name what happens when the process stalls. A lead waits without a response. A client becomes uncertain. A deadline becomes urgent. A team member interrupts the owner, or a past client opportunity disappears. The consequence helps you distinguish an inconvenience from a meaningful business risk. Choose one process to make visible. Select a process that occurs often enough to test, creates real stress or risk, and has a common path that can be defined. Do not start with the most unusual exception in the business. Begin where a useful standard can remove repeated uncertainty. Do not automate it yet. First, write the starting event, desired outcome, owner, timing, required context, approval boundary, and evidence. Once the process makes sense on paper, decide which parts belong in SAM, which can be supported by AI, and which should remain with a person. The purpose of this exercise is not to prove that the business should run without its owner. The owner's judgment, leadership, and relationships remain important. The purpose is to stop using the owner's memory and constant availability as the hidden infrastructure for ordinary work. When the common path is visible, the owner can spend more time on decisions and people instead of acting as the reminder system for the business. The core business diagnostic. Find the constraint before choosing the system. When owners decide they need better systems, the first temptation is to fix everything they can see. They clean the database, rewrite the lead follow-up, build transaction checklists, create a newsletter, change their stages, and start several automations at the same time. That activity feels productive, but it often creates 5 partially built systems instead of one reliable improvement. C.O.R.E gives us a way to slow that down and find the part of the business that is creating the greatest constraint. Conversions, operations, retention, and experiences are connected. A weakness in one area eventually affects the others. The goal of a diagnostic is not to judge the owner or produce a flattering score. The goal is to identify the first condition that, if improved, would make the rest of the business easier to operate. This diagnostic should be based on evidence, not intention. An owner may care deeply about follow-up and still have leads without a next action. A team may believe it provides excellent communication, while clients regularly ask what is happening. A past client campaign may exist on paper, but reach only the people somebody remembers to add. Score what the business does consistently, especially during a busy week, rather than what the owner knows should happen. The 5 levels of system strength. Score, working definition, what the evidence usually shows. 1. Reactive. Important work depends primarily on memory and personal effort. The work moves when the owner notices it. Missing steps are usually found after they become urgent. 2. Inconsistent. Parts of a process exist, but they are difficult to see or are not followed reliably. Checklists, templates, or automations exist, but use varies by person, source, client, or workload. 3. Usable. A common process exists and works in normal situations. Most ordinary work follows a known path, but exceptions, handoffs, ownership, or measurement remain weak. 4. Reliable. The process is visible, owned, measured, and dependable across the business. Team members can see what should happen. Clients receive consistent service, and gaps are noticed before they become emergencies. 5. Advantage. The system is reliable and is intentionally improved using evidence. The business learns from results, strengthens standards, and uses its systems to create a better client and owner experience. A score of 3 is not a failure. It means the business has something real to improve instead of starting from nothing. A score of 4 should not be given because a detailed checklist exists. The process must be used, visible, and dependable. A score of 5 is rare because it requires more than automation. It requires a feedback loop that helps the business learn and make the system better. Evaluate conversions. Conversions covers the work from the moment an opportunity is created or received until the person becomes an active client or is placed into an appropriate long-term path. It includes positioning, lead magnets, capture, source information, first response, qualification, consultation, follow-up, nurture, reactivation, appointment outcomes, and the decision to continue or stop pursuing an opportunity. A weak conversion system does not always mean the business lacks leads. It often means the leads already being generated are not consistently advanced. New inquiries may receive an initial message, but no defined response pattern. A referral may be treated exactly like a cold website registration, even though the relationship and expectations are different. An agent may have a productive first conversation and then leave the next follow-up in a notebook. Opportunities that are not ready today may remain in the database without a reason, future date, or nurture path. To score conversions, look at recent opportunities rather than the pipeline total. Can you identify the current stage, owner, source, prior communication, and dated next step for each real opportunity? Does the first response reflect how the lead arrived? Does follow-up continue after the first few attempts? Is there a defined point at which an opportunity moves into nurture, reactivation, or a closed status? Can the business distinguish between somebody who has not responded and somebody who has been contacted but is not ready? If the answers vary depending on who remembered the lead, the conversion system is not yet reliable. Evaluate operations. Operations covers how the business delivers buyer, seller, listing, transaction, closing, project, and related service work after an opportunity becomes an active client. It includes the common path, important dates, responsibilities, handoffs, documents, client updates, vendor coordination, exceptions, approvals, and proof that promised work was completed. A weak operation system often hides behind a strong agent. Clients may still reach closing because the owner checks everything, answers every question, and rescues problems before anyone else sees them. The client may receive good service, but the business is borrowing that reliability from the owner's attention. When production increases, the hidden dependency becomes more visible. Prospecting slows, evenings fill with administrative work, team members ask repeated questions, and ordinary details become urgent. To score operations, examine active files and ask whether another qualified person could understand where each client stands. Can they see the current stage, next milestone, owner, due date, outstanding question, and client communication expectation? Are contract-specific dates connected to the work they should start? Do common processes run consistently while exceptions are escalated for judgment? Does the client know what happened and what comes next without needing to request an update? If the answer depends on asking the owner, operations is still relying on personal availability. Evaluate retention. Retention begins before the closing is complete. It is the system that carries a client relationship forward after the active transaction and gives the business a meaningful reason to remain useful. It includes the closing handoff, relationship and household information, property context, home anniversaries, annual real estate reviews, personal milestones, relevant market communication, client events, repeat business signals, referral opportunities, and reactivation. A weak retention system often looks like a large database with very little current relationship activity. The business may send newsletters or holiday messages, but the communication is not connected to what the agent knows about the person. The closing process ends without a next relationship action. Important context remains in the agent's memory, a transaction file, or an old message. The agent cares about the relationship but has no dependable way to decide who should hear from them, why the contact would matter, or what should happen after the conversation. To score retention, review recent closings and establish past clients. Did each closing create a next relationship step with a reason and timing? Is the property, household, spouse, or partner, source, history, and important personal context available? Are there different standards for people who need different types of contact? Or does everyone receive the same campaign? Can the business identify relationships that have gone quiet and prepare the agent for a useful conversation? If staying connected depends on the agent thinking of the person at the right moment, retention remains reactive. Evaluate experiences. Experiences is not a separate department that adds gifts, branded materials, or pleasant surprises after the important work is finished. It is the way a person feels, understands, and moves through conversion, operations, and retention. Experience is shaped by response time, clarity, preparation, tone, expectation setting, handoffs, progress visibility, personal recognition, and the business's ability to reduce unnecessary uncertainty. A weak experience system can exist inside a technically correct business. The tasks may be completed, but the client does not know what is happening. Explanations change depending on who gives them. The client repeats information after a handoff. Automated communication arrives at a moment when a personal call was needed. Silence makes a normal delay feel like a problem. The business may believe it communicates frequently, while the client still feels unsure because the communication does not answer the question they actually have. To score experiences, look for moments of uncertainty. When a lead responds, do they know what to expect next? After a consultation, are the decision and next steps clear? When a seller signs an agreement, do they understand the preparation and launch sequence? After an inspection, do clients know when they will hear from the agent and what decisions may be required? At closing, do they understand how the relationship will continue? If clients repeatedly ask for status, timing, explanations, or confirmation, the experience contains gaps even if every internal task was completed. Use the lowest honest score. After scoring all 4 areas, begin with the lowest honest score, not the area you enjoy most. If 2 areas have the same score, choose the one creating the greatest combination of risk, repeated friction, and client uncertainty. Risk includes missed commitments, compliance concerns, lost opportunities, and service failures. Friction includes repeated checking, interruptions, duplicate entry, and work that follows the owner home. Client uncertainty includes moments when people do not understand what happened, what they need to do, or when they will hear from the business. Your lowest score identifies where to investigate, but it may not identify the root cause. For example, retention may score lowest because no post-closing follow-up occurs. The deeper cause may be an operations handoff that closes the transaction without capturing household information or creating the next relationship step. Experience may score low because clients do not receive updates, while the root problem is that operations has no visible milestone or owner to start the communication. Follow the missed next step backward until you find the first unclear decision or handoff. The result of this diagnostic should be one working statement. The first system we need to improve is blank because blank. We will know it is improving when blank. The first blank names a specific process, not an entire core area. The second names the current consequence. The third identifies observable evidence. That statement becomes the boundary that protects you from trying to rebuild everything at once. The C.O.R.E operating model. 4 connected areas, 1 client journey. C.O.R.E is best understood as a connected operating model, not a list of 4 business categories. A real person does not experience your business as separate marketing, transaction, database, and client care departments. They experience one relationship. They remember what you promised when they first contacted you, how prepared you were when the work became serious, whether they understood the process, how you responded when something changed, and whether the relationship continued after the closing. The business usually separates those activities because different tools or people handle them. Leads may live in one pipeline, active transactions in another system, communications in email and text, and past clients in a marketing list. That separation may be convenient for the software, but it creates a problem for the client journey. Context is lost at the handoff. The person has to repeat information. A promise made during the consultation never reaches the transaction process. The closing removes the person from active work without creating a meaningful next step. Each department may complete its tasks while the relationship becomes less connected. The purpose of C.O.R.E is to preserve the relationship, the operating context, and the next action as a person moves through the business. Conversions creates and advances the opportunity. Operations delivers the work that was promised. Retention continues the relationship and creates the conditions for future repeat and referral business. Experiences shapes how clear, personal, and dependable all 3 areas feel. Routines connect meaningful events to the next work, so the journey can continue without depending on somebody to rebuild the plan at every stage. Conversions creates a qualified path forward. Conversion begins before a lead fills out a form. It begins with the business deciding who it serves, what problem it is prepared to solve, what makes its approach useful, and what message will cause the right person to pay attention. That decision shapes lead magnets, landing pages, advertisements, referrals, social content, calls to action, and the questions used to understand an inquiry. Once an opportunity enters the business, conversion has 2 responsibilities. The first is to create a timely and relevant human path forward. The second is to preserve enough information for the business to know how the opportunity should be handled. A referral from a valued past client carries different context than an anonymous portal lead. A homeowner requesting a property value resource may not be ready for a listing appointment, but the request gives the business a reason to begin a useful conversation. A sign call may require an immediate response and a property-specific discussion. Treating each source the same may be easy to automate, but it ignores the reason the person raised their hand. A strong conversion system does not force every person through the same sequence. It defines the common standards and uses the lead's source, situation, behavior, communication, and readiness to determine the next appropriate step. The goal is not to send more messages. The goal is to make sure a real opportunity is understood, owned, followed, and moved toward a decision without becoming invisible when the person is not ready today. Operations fulfills the promise. The handoff from conversion to operations occurs when the relationship changes from possibility to active service. This may be a buyer agency agreement, listing agreement, accepted offer, consultation decision, or another clear business event. The stage change matters because the business has made promises that now need to become work. Operations should receive more than a contact name and a status. It should receive the reason the client chose the business, the goals they described, the concerns they raised, the communication preferences they shared. the expectations that were set, the people involved in the decision, and the first next action. Without that context, the client enters operations as if the relationship is starting over. The team may execute a technically correct checklist while missing the personal commitments that helped earn the client's trust. A strong operations system makes the common path visible without pretending every client or transaction is identical. Important dates start the work they affect. Responsibilities are assigned before the due date. Client communication is connected to milestones instead of waiting for the client to ask. Standard explanations are available, but the agent can adjust them based on the client and situation. Exceptions are brought to the right person rather than hidden inside a rigid automation. The system handles repeatable work so the owner can give attention to advice, negotiation, risk, and care. Retention carries the relationship beyond the closing. Closing is an operational finish line, but it should not be a relationship finish line. A client who has completed a transaction now has more history with the business, not less. The business knows the property, the people involved, the decisions that mattered, the experience they had, and the promises made about staying in touch. If that information is allowed to become dormant, the next conversation often begins years later with less context than the business had on closing day. Retention should receive a complete relationship handoff. That includes accurate household and contact information, property and transaction history, important preferences, personal context that is appropriate to retain, unfinished commitments, service feedback, likely future needs, and a meaningful reason for the next contact. The next step should not be add to newsletter unless the newsletter is genuinely useful and only one part of a broader relationship standard. A strong retention system gives the agent prepared reasons to be useful. It may bring forward a home anniversary, an annual real estate review, a neighborhood change, a life event, a market question, a client event, or a prior goal that deserves another conversation. Technology can help remember and prepare, but the agent still decides when the relationship calls for a personal message, a phone call, useful information, or no contact at all. Retention returns opportunities to conversion with their history intact. C.O.R.E becomes a flywheel when a past client raises a hand again or introduces someone new. A repeat client should not re-enter the business as a blank lead. Their prior relationship, property history, communication preferences, and service experience should be available. A referral should carry the referring relationship, the way the introduction occurred, the reason trust may already exist, and any promises made during the introduction. This return path matters because repeat and referral opportunities should receive the benefit of what the business has already learned. When the information is preserved, the next conversation can begin with recognition instead of rediscovery. When it is not preserved, the business risks treating its best relationships like unknown internet leads. Experience surrounds the entire model. Experience is often drawn around conversions, operations, and retention because it affects every stage rather than occurring after them. During conversion, experience is created by relevance, response, listening, preparation, and the clarity of the next step. During operations, it is created by expectation setting, progress visibility, explanations, reliable follow-through, and thoughtful handling of uncertainty. During retention, it is created by remembering the person, contacting them for a useful reason, respecting preferences, and continuing the relationship without making every conversation feel like a request for business. This means an experience cannot be repaired with gifts if the underlying process creates confusion. A closing gift may be appreciated, but it does not undo weeks of unclear communication. A polished client portal may look impressive, but it cannot create confidence if its dates and updates are incomplete. A personal video may feel thoughtful, but it will not help if it arrives after the client had to call twice for an answer. Experience is the result of how the system behaves at the moments that matter. Routines carry the next action between the areas. A routine is the connective mechanism that turns a business event into prepared work. When an inquiry is received, a routine may assign the lead, create the first response expectation, prepare a message, and schedule the next attempt. When a listing agreement is signed, a routine may create the preparation path, assign responsibilities, request needed information, and prepare the client's next step communication. When a transaction closes, a routine may confirm the relationship record, schedule the next meaningful contact, and move the client into an appropriate retention path. The routine does not create the strategy. It carries the strategy after the owner has decided what should happen. That distinction protects the business from building activity without purpose. Before a routine is created, the business should know the trigger, desired result, owner, timing, context, normal path, approval boundary, exception path, and evidence. If those elements are unclear, the work is not ready to be automated. Audit one journey from beginning to return. Choose one recent client and trace the relationship from the first known opportunity through the present day. Use the real records, messages, notes, transaction information, and follow-up that exist. Do not reconstruct an ideal journey from memory. Work through the audit in 5 passes. Trace conversion. Identify how the person entered the business, what they wanted, what was learned, what follow-up occurred, what promise was made, and what event made them an active client. Inspect the operations handoff. Determine which information moved into the active client process and which information remained in the agent's memory, inbox, or notes. Identify any question the client had to answer again. Trace the operational experience. Review the important milestones, responsibilities, client updates, moments of uncertainty, exceptions, and promises. Note where the client had to ask what was happening. Inspect the retention handoff. Determine what the business preserved at closing, what next relationship step was created, why that step was useful, and whether it occurred. Test the return path. Imagine that the client called today or referred a friend. Decide whether the business could begin the next conversation with the full value of the relationship already available. At the end of the audit, name the first handoff where important context or ownership was lost. That handoff is often a better starting point than rebuilding an entire pipeline. When the business preserves the promise, context, owner, expectation, and next action at each transition, C.O.R.E begins to function as one operating model instead of 4 disconnected areas. The intelligence behind the system. Technology should prepare the work, not replace judgment. Technology becomes most useful after the business has made a clear decision. If the owner has not decided what a good first response looks like, who owns it, or when it should occur, AI can create words, but it cannot create the missing service standard. If the listing process has no agreed handoff, automation can create tasks, but it cannot settle who is responsible. If the team does not know when a client update requires a personal call, a message can be sent at the wrong moment with perfect technical accuracy. The purpose of SAM, AI, intelligence, and the developing SAM brain direction is to help the business use what it already knows, prepare the next work, and make important conditions easier to notice. The purpose is not to remove the owner from decisions that require advice, empathy, accountability, or professional judgment. A strong operating model is not human or technology. It is a clear division of responsibility between them. Separate facts, knowledge, context, and judgment. 4 different kinds of information affect the next action. Facts describe what is currently true. A contact submitted a form, a listing agreement was signed, an inspection is scheduled for Tuesday, or a client prefers text messages. Facts usually belong in structured records where the business can find and update them. Knowledge explains how the business works and what it has learned. This includes the team's listing process, the explanation Mark gives before an inspection, the service standard for a referral, the tone used in client communication, the lessons learned from prior transactions, and the boundaries that define when a person must review the work. Knowledge may exist in documents, templates, examples, recordings, or the owner's head. Context determines which facts and knowledge matter right now. A seller's concern about timing matters when preparing the listing plan. A buyer's prior question about school boundaries may matter before the next showing conversation. A promise made during a consultation matters when the client enters operations. Context is what prevents the system from treating every record and every moment as if they were identical. Judgment is the human responsibility to interpret the situation, weigh risk, apply experience, and decide what should happen when the answer is not safely determined by a standard. Negotiation, pricing advice, inspection strategy, legal or contractual concerns, emotionally difficult conversations, exceptions, and relationship-sensitive choices remain human work. Technology may prepare relevant information, but the responsible professional makes the decision. Confusing these categories creates poor systems. Storing facts in a long document can make them hard to update. Treating an owner's opinion as an unchanging fact can make AI overconfident. Asking a routine to handle judgment without a clear approval boundary can create risk. Expecting a person to repeatedly search for known facts wastes attention. Each part should live where it can be maintained and used appropriately. SAM organizes the operating truth. SAM currently provides the connected operating layer for contacts, relationships, properties, listings, transactions, activities, calendar commitments, communications, pipelines, routines, and other business records available in the account. This operating truth answers questions such as who the person is, what relationship exists, what property or transaction is involved, what has happened, what is scheduled, what communication occurred, and which process is active. The value of that connection is not merely convenience. When records are connected correctly, a future action can be based on a meaningful business event rather than somebody remembering to create it. A transaction milestone can start work. A contact status can determine which follow-up applies. A relationship connection can prevent the business from communicating with 2 members of the same household as if they were strangers. A completed closing can begin a retention process. The record becomes part of how the business operates. SAM still depends on the quality of the decisions and information provided. A missing source, incorrect stage, duplicate contact, absent relationship, or unclear owner can weaken the action that follows. The goal is not to make every field perfect before using the system. The goal is to identify the few pieces of information that the process must trust and make those pieces part of the operating standard. AI assists with preparation. AI can help summarize communication, draft a message, prepare talking points, organize notes, describe a possible workflow, turn a repeated explanation into a starting template, and help the owner compare information. That assistance can reduce the time required to prepare work. especially when the AI has useful facts and clear instructions. AI does not automatically know the owner's standards, the client's full situation, or the reason an exception matters. A polished draft can still be wrong. A summary can omit a detail that the agent considers important. A suggested workflow can sound complete while missing ownership, timing, or an approval step. Human review is not an inconvenience added to the process. It is part of the process when tone, advice, risk, or relationship judgment matters. The best use of AI begins with a defined job. Write something to this lead is vague. Using the inquiry source, the property requested, the prior message, and our approved first response standard, prepare a concise reply for my review that answers the question and offers the next useful step, gives the assistance a purpose and boundary. The owner still reviews the draft, but the work begins closer to useful. SAM intelligence can help notice conditions. Where available for the account and configuration, SAM Intelligence can help surface conditions that deserve attention. These may include stale opportunities, missed commitments, unanswered questions, slipping work, unusual gaps, records without a clear next step, or preparation that would help the owner begin the day or enter a conversation with better context. The word intelligence should not imply certainty. A system may notice that a lead has not received a response within the expected time, but a person may know that the conversation continued by phone outside the normal record. It may identify an unusual delay in a transaction, but the delay may be expected. The useful pattern is notice, review, and decide. Intelligence brings a condition forward. The responsible person confirms what it means and chooses the action. Availability of intelligence capabilities can vary by account, integration, configuration, and product release. The guide should teach the operating principle even when a specific capability is not available. Define what the business wants to notice. Identify the evidence that condition would leave, decide who should review it, and establish what should happen after confirmation. SAM Brain represents the product direction for grounded business knowledge. SAM Brain references in this guide describe product direction, not a promise that every capability is currently released. The direction is to help SAM use a governed, versioned body of business knowledge that includes approved processes, explanations, preferences, standards, examples, decisions, lessons, and other information that makes the business distinct. The purpose is not to create a pile of documents and call it a brain. The purpose is to make the right knowledge retrievable when it is relevant to the work. A seller's communication should be able to draw from the business's approved seller process and voice. A call preparation request should be able to retrieve the relationship history, prior commitments, and useful market or property context. A routine building conversation should be able to reference the owner's operating rules and approval boundaries. The system should separate known facts from assumptions and ask for confirmation when the evidence is incomplete. This is why the built-on core knowledge hunt begins with finding, collecting, and noticing rather than trying to organize everything at once. Agents already possess years of valuable knowledge in presentations, emails, checklists, videos, documents, templates, transaction examples, and unwritten experience. Before that knowledge can support AI or the business, the owner needs to know it exists, determine what is still accurate, and decide what should become an approved standard. Routines turn approved decisions into action. Routines are where the operating decision becomes repeatable work. A routine can respond to a meaningful event by creating or assigning activities, preparing communication, scheduling follow-up, changing a status, notifying the right person, or starting another part of the process. The exact capabilities depend on the record, action, account configuration, and available integrations. A routine should carry an approved standard, not invent one. Before building it, the owner should be able to explain what triggers the routine, what outcome it supports, who owns each action, when the actions should occur, what information they require, which actions may proceed automatically, which require review, what exceptions should stop or change the path, and what evidence will show completion. If the owner cannot explain those decisions, the system is not ready to be made faster. This is also why the first version should be the smallest useful version. A 40-step routine that has never been tested contains 40 opportunities to encode a weak assumption. A short routine built around one real event can be tested with a real contact, listing, transaction, or past client. The owner can observe what happened, correct the trigger or timing, add missing context, adjust the communication, and expand only after the common path works. Human responsibility remains visible. Human in the loop should be a business design decision, not a general statement placed at the bottom of an AI feature. The owner should decide where a person must review, approve, interpret, or communicate. Sensitive client messages, advice, negotiation, pricing, contract issues, exceptions, complaints, emotionally difficult moments, and decisions that could materially affect a client or relationship should have clear human ownership. Other actions may be safe to prepare or complete automatically when the trigger, content, audience, and risk are understood. A routine may create an internal task, update a stage, schedule a future review, or prepare a draft without sending it. An approved confirmation message may be appropriate after a clear event. The decision should be based on the possible harm of being wrong, the importance of the relationship moment, and whether the action requires professional judgment. The goal is not maximum automation. The goal is dependable work with the right amount of human involvement. Sometimes the best system action is to create a call task with prepared context because the client needs a person. Sometimes the best action is to send an approved logistical confirmation because making the client wait adds no value. Good system design knows the difference. Use the decide, record, prepare, act, confirm, learn cycle. The following cycle can be used to design almost any core process. It keeps technology in the correct role and gives the business a way to improve. Decide. Define what should happen, why it matters, who owns it, when it should occur, and where human judgment is required. Record. Identify the facts, relationships, dates, stages, preferences, and knowledge the process must trust. Put operating facts into the appropriate SAM records and keep approved business knowledge in a form that can be maintained. Prepare. Decide what SAM, AI, intelligence, or future grounded knowledge support can organize, summarize, draft, retrieve, or bring forward before a person acts. Act. Let the routine, team member, or owner complete the next useful action within the approved boundary. Preserve personal involvement where it improves advice, care, or trust. Confirm. Capture visible evidence that the action occurred and that required review was completed. If the desired outcome depends on a response or next stage, make that condition visible too. Learn. Review what happened with real work. Correct the trigger, timing, ownership, information, communication, or boundary. Do not rebuild the whole process because one exception occurred. Improve the part the evidence showed was weak. Map the support for one real decision. Choose a repeated decision from conversion, operations, retention, or experience. A useful example might be deciding what happens after a website inquiry, preparing a seller after an accepted offer, moving a client into post-closing care, or communicating after an inspection. Write the desired business decision in plain language before opening the software. Then identify the operating facts Sam must hold, the knowledge that explains how the business wants the situation handled, the context that determines which part of that knowledge applies, and the judgment that should remain with a person. Decide what a routine can start, what AI can prepare, what intelligence should help notice when available, what must be reviewed, and what evidence should remain after the work is complete. If the exercise produces a long list of features, but the next action is still unclear, return to the business decision. The technology should make a defined process easier to operate. It should not become a substitute for defining the process. When the decision is clear, the right use of SAM, AI, and human judgment becomes much easier to see. The C in C.O.R.E. Conversions. Create a clear path from attention to decision. Conversion is often reduced to lead generation or sales skill. Those things matter, but they do not describe the full system. A business can generate a steady stream of inquiries and still lose opportunity because the leads are not understood, assigned, followed, or moved toward a useful decision. It can also convert appointments while attracting people who are poorly matched to the way the business works. The result is activity without a dependable path forward. A conversion system begins before the inquiry. It begins with the business deciding whom it is best equipped to help, what those people are trying to accomplish, what they fear or misunderstand, and why they should trust this business with the next step. Those decisions affect everything that follows. They shape the lead magnet, landing page, advertisement, referral conversation, social post, consultation, follow-up, and language used by the team. The purpose of conversion is not to pressure every lead into an appointment. It is to create enough relevance, clarity, consistency, and trust for the right person to take the next appropriate step. Sometimes that step is a conversation today. Sometimes it is a future follow-up tied to a real plan. Sometimes it is a useful resource that begins a relationship. Sometimes the correct result is deciding that the opportunity is not a fit. A reliable system makes those outcomes visible instead of leaving every contact in an undefined follow-up pile. Positioning comes before promotion. When an agent says, "I work with everyone," it may sound inclusive, but it gives the marketing system very little useful direction. A first-time buyer, an experienced investor, a family relocating into the market, and a homeowner preparing to downsize may all need an agent. They do not begin with the same questions, fears, timelines, or definition of value. Content written for all of them at once usually becomes so general that none of them feels specifically understood. An ideal client definition is not a rule that prevents the agent from helping anyone else. It is a decision about where the business will focus its clearest message and strongest systems. The definition should go beyond age, income, zip code, and property type. Those facts may help with targeting, but they do not explain what is happening inside the person's decision. The business needs to understand what changed, what the person wants, what they are worried about, what they have already tried, what they believe about the market or process, and what would make the next step feel safe and worthwhile. The unique selling proposition grows from the intersection of that client need and the way the business actually serves. It should not be a slogan created because every agent needs a tagline. It should explain why the business's approach is especially useful for a defined situation. A strong position may be based on process, expertise, communication, market knowledge, negotiation, specialized resources, or the way uncertainty is reduced. The claim must be supported by how the business operates. If the marketing promises a carefully guided process, but operations does not provide clear next steps, the conversion system is making a promise the business cannot consistently fulfill. Before creating more content, write a plain language answer to this question. For which kind of person, facing which kind of situation, are we especially prepared to create a better path? That answer does not need to sound clever. It needs to be specific enough to guide what the business teaches, asks, offers, and builds. A lead magnet should begin a useful relationship. A lead magnet is not simply a PDF traded for an email address. It is a small demonstration of how the business thinks and helps. It should solve an early problem, answer an important question, help the person make a decision, or show them something they did not know how to evaluate on their own. The topic should be close enough to the eventual real estate need that the follow-up can continue naturally. A generic buyer guide may provide information, but it gives the business very little context about why the person requested it. A more focused resource, assessment, checklist, calculator, local guide, or decision tool can help the person identify where they are and what they need next. The best lead magnets create a reason for the next conversation without forcing one. They allow the agent to say, you asked for this because you are working through a particular decision. Here is the next thing that may help. Sam can assist with developing lead magnet ideas, drafting initial content, creating landing pages or assessments, capturing responses, and connecting the new contact to follow-up. All can help organize research, compare client concerns, create a first draft, or adjust language. The owner still needs to verify the content, add real experience, remove generic advice, and make sure the resource represents how the business actually serves. A well-formatted document that could belong to any agent is not yet a useful piece of positioning. Capture the reason, not only the contact information. Many lead forms capture a name, email address, and phone number, then expect the agent to reconstruct the person's situation after the fact. Those fields make communication possible, but they may not explain why the person raised their hand. A conversion system should capture the minimum context needed to provide the right next step without turning the form into an interrogation. The useful context depends on the offer. A home value request may need the property address, ownership relationship, reason for curiosity, and possible timing. A relocation guide may need the current location, expected move window, areas of interest, and whether employment or family is driving the move. A first-time buyer assessment may need the person's biggest uncertainty, financing status, timing, and preferred next type of help. The business does not need every possible answer. It needs enough information to avoid starting with a generic response. The source must also remain attached to the contact. Facebook is often too broad to explain the person's intent. The business should be able to distinguish the campaign, resource, event, property, referral relationship, or conversation that produced the opportunity. This source context affects response language, priority, qualification, and the longer-term nurture path. If the source is lost, the business begins the relationship by forgetting the first thing the person told it. Speed matters, but relevance earns the next step. Fast response is valuable because intent and attention fade. A person who submits a question may be actively comparing options or may simply have a brief opening in a busy day. Waiting several hours or days makes the conversation harder to begin. The system should acknowledge the inquiry quickly, assign ownership, and create the first useful action even when the agent is in an appointment, sleeping, traveling, or working with another client. Speed alone is not enough. An instant response that ignores what the person asked can feel less helpful than a thoughtful response that arrives a little later. The best first response system separates acknowledgement from the conversation that requires a person. The business may immediately confirm that the request was received, provide the promised resource, explain what will happen next, and identify who will respond. It can then prepare the agent with the source, request, contact history, relevant property or market information, and a recommended next action. Different sources need different standards. A sign call or live property inquiry may require immediate routing and a fast personal response. A referral deserves recognition of the referring relationship and any promise made during the introduction. A content download may need delivery of the resource, a useful question, and permission to continue. A social media comment may first need a direct message and a simple way to provide contact information. One universal message may be easier to build, but it usually loses the context that made the lead meaningful. SAM can organize the contact, source, stage, relationship, messages, owner, and next action. Routines can help acknowledge, assign, notify, prepare work, schedule the next attempt, or place a contact into an appropriate call list or nurture path. AI can help draft a response using the available context and the business's approved language. Where configured and available, intelligence may help surface inquiries without timely response or opportunities without a current next step. The human remains responsible for qualification, tone, advice, promises, and the conversation that builds trust. Follow-up should respond to the lead state. Many businesses define follow-up as a sequence of messages sent over a fixed number of days. A sequence can create consistency, but it is not a complete follow-up system. The person's state can change after any interaction. They may reply with a question, schedule an appointment, reveal that their timing is a year away, ask not to be contacted by text, begin working with another agent, or become an active client. The system needs a way to recognize those changes and move the person to the correct path. It helps to distinguish no response, active conversation, future opportunity, active nurture, and closed or disqualified status. No response means the business has not yet learned whether the opportunity is real or timely. Active conversation means the person is engaging and the next action should be based on what was discussed. A future opportunity has a known reason and likely time, such as a lease expiration, planned retirement, school year change, estate decision, construction completion, or job relocation. Active nurture means the person is not ready for direct action, but has a relevant reason to continue receiving useful information. Closed or disqualified means the business has made an intentional decision rather than simply abandoning the record. Long-term follow-up should be built around reasons, not guilt. A task that says check in gives the agent no useful beginning. A task that says call in October because their lease expires in January and they wanted to begin lender planning 3 months ahead carries the reason, timing, and intended outcome. The system should preserve what was learned so the next contact feels like a continuation of the relationship rather than a new sales attempt. Qualification protects both sides of the relationship. Qualification should not be treated as deciding whether a person is valuable. It is the process of deciding whether the business can help, whether the opportunity is real, what the person needs, and what next step makes sense. Good qualification protects the agent from spending time on an undefined opportunity, and it protects the consumer from being pushed into a process that does not fit. The question should help the agent understand motivation, timing, decision makers, property or financing conditions, prior actions, expectations, obstacles, and the person's willingness to take the next step. The agent should also explain how the business works, what will be expected of the client, and where the process may not fit. Qualification becomes mutual when both sides are allowed to make a clear decision. The business should define what information must be known before scheduling a consultation and what can appropriately be learned during the meeting. Requiring too much before a conversation can create friction. Requiring too little can fill the calendar with appointments that have no clear purpose. The standard should reflect the source and situation. A warm referral may enter differently from an anonymous registration, but neither should be allowed to remain without a known next step. The consultation should produce a decision, not merely a presentation. A consultation is not successful because the agent completed the slides. It is successful when the people involved understand their situation, the options, the process, the agent's approach, and the next decision. The meeting should be designed around discovery and clarity rather than the amount of information the agent can present. Preparation matters. Before the meeting, the agent should be able to review the source, prior communication, people involved, stated goals, known property or market information, unanswered questions, and any promises already made. All can help summarize communication or prepare talking points, but the agent should verify the information and decide how to lead the conversation. The consultation itself should make room for the person's concerns, assumptions, and prior experiences. A polished presentation cannot replace listening. The meeting should end with an explicit outcome. The person may sign an agreement, complete a next step, schedule a follow-up decision, enter a future plan, or decide not to proceed. Let me know is rarely a system. If the next action belongs to the client, the business should record what the client agreed to do and when the agent should follow up. If the next action belongs to the agent, it should have an owner, timing, purpose, and any needed context before the meeting is considered complete. Measure movement, not message volume. The purpose of conversion measurement is to find where real opportunities stop moving. Message counts and email opens may provide clues, but they do not prove that the system is creating clear next steps. Useful evidence includes response time, percentage of inquiries assigned correctly, records with a current stage and dated next action, conversation rate, consultation set and held rates, consultation outcomes, movement into long-term nurture, and opportunities that went stale without an intentional decision. The business should review results by source because different sources create different expectations and timelines. A referral may convert through fewer contacts but require more personal preparation. A long-term content lead may need months of relevant nurture. A portal lead may require immediate response and more attempts. Comparing all leads as if they should behave the same can cause the business to stop a useful path or continue an ineffective one. Evidence should lead to a question, not an accusation. If response time is slow, determine whether ownership, notification, coverage, or expectations are unclear. If appointments are scheduled but not held, review qualification, preparation, confirmation, and the value promised for the meeting. If leads become stale after a conversation, inspect whether the agent recorded a reason and future action. The system improves when the cause is identified instead of telling the team to try harder. Conversion fieldwork. Build one lead source path. Choose one lead source that currently produces real inquiries. Use a source with enough recent activity to test, such as a website form, property inquiry, sign call, referral, open house, social media response, home value request, or lead magnet download. Do not begin with a theoretical campaign that has not produced a real contact. Define the promise before the capture. Write what the person expects to receive or experience when they respond. Identify the specific problem, question, or decision that caused them to raise their hand. Define the starting event. Name the observable event that enters the person into the system. This may be a submitted form, inbound call, direct message, completed assessment, introduction, or imported lead notification. Choose the minimum required context. Decide which facts the business needs for a relevant first response. Include the detailed source and the reason for the inquiry. Remove questions that do not affect the next step. Assign ownership and coverage. Name who owns the first response, the expected timing, and what happens when that person is unavailable. Decide which acknowledgement can be prepared automatically and which conversation requires a person. Map the response paths. Define what happens after no response, an active conversation, a future timeline, a consultation request, a disqualification, or a request to stop communication. Each meaningful state should have an appropriate next action. Define the consultation outcome. Decide what must be understood before the meeting, what the consultation should accomplish, and which outcomes can result. Require a dated next action before the opportunity leaves the consultation stage. Test with real records. Review at least 5 recent contacts from the source. Confirm the source, owner, stage, communication history, known timing, and dated next action. Apply the proposed standard and record where it does not fit. The first version is working when every real opportunity from that source can be found, understood, assigned, and advanced without the owner searching several places or trying to remember the prior conversation. And it does not need to produce a guaranteed appointment or closing. The business is responsible for creating a dependable opportunity path. The person remains responsible for the decision they make. The O in C.O.R.E. Operations. Turn the promise into dependable client work. Conversion earns the opportunity to serve. Operations determines whether the business fulfills what it promised. This is where positioning and consultation language become buyer service, seller service, listing preparation, transaction management, closing work, projects, repairs, communication, and the daily responsibilities that carry a client from agreement to completion. Operational problems are often difficult to see because strong agents compensate for them. They remember the missing deadline, catch the incomplete document, answer the client's question, contact the vendor, and work late to make sure the transaction closes. From the client's point of view, the problem may have been solved. From the owner's point of view, the business required another rescue. A dependable operation does not remove the agent's judgment. It separates repeatable work from work that needs judgment so both receive the right attention. The normal path becomes visible, assigned, and supported. Exceptions are identified early and directed to the person qualified to handle them. The client receives useful communication at important moments. The owner can see the work without being required to personally push every step. Begin with the client promise. Before mapping tasks, return to what the client was told during conversion. If the business promised proactive updates, careful preparation, a guided process, or a particular communication standard, those promises should appear in the operation. Otherwise, marketing and delivery are describing two different businesses. The handoff should preserve the client's goals, concerns, preferences, decision makers, property or financing context, timing, and the expectations established during consultation. It should also identify the first operational event. A signed listing agreement may start preparation, but the work may differ depending on whether the property is ready, occupied, inherited, being repaired, or waiting on a future launch date. A signed buyer agreement may start lender confirmation, search setup, education, and showing preparation, but the order depends on what has already occurred. The operation should not force the client to repeat what the business already learned. Repetition signals that the internal process changed while the relationship did not carry forward. A clean handoff allows the next person, routine, or process to begin with the same understanding the agent had when the client said yes. Map the common path before the exceptions. Every real estate process contains exceptions. That does not mean the process cannot be standardized. The business should first identify the path that is usually true, then mark the conditions that change it. Trying to include every unusual possibility in the first routine creates a system that is too complicated to understand or test. For a seller, the common path may include onboarding, property information, preparation decisions, photography, marketing assets, MLS readiness, launch, showing feedback, offer review, contract, inspection, appraisal, title, closing preparation, closing, and the relationship handoff. For a buyer, it may include onboarding, lender or proof of funds confirmation, needs and decision criteria, search setup, showing process, offer preparation, contract, inspection, appraisal, financing, title, closing preparation, closing, and retention. A transaction process may begin at accepted offer and support either side through important dates, documents, coordination, decisions, communication, and completion. Each stage should have a clear entrance and exit. Listing preparation begins when a defined agreement or readiness condition occurs. It ends when the property and required materials meet the business's launch standard. Under contract begins when a fully executed agreement is received and recorded. It ends when the transaction closes, terminates, or moves to another defined condition. Clear boundaries prevent records from sitting in a stage because nobody knows what must happen before they move. Let important dates start the work they affect. Real estate operations are filled with dates, but recording a date is not the same as using it. An inspection date affects preparation, attendance, client explanation, negotiation timing, and future deadlines. A photography date affects property readiness, access, reminders, and launch preparation. A closing date affects utilities, walkthrough, funds, documents, keys, possession, gifts, communication, and the transition into retention. The business should decide which date or milestone starts each part of the process. In SAM, important dates associated with contacts, properties, listings, or transactions can support date-based routines and actions. Depending on the setup, those actions may create activities, prepare or send messages, add someone to a call list, update information, initiate a webhook, notify through an integration, or prompt manual review. The specific configuration matters, but the operating principle remains the same. A meaningful date should make the related work visible without depending on someone to remember to create it. Dates must also be trusted. If a transaction date is missing, entered incorrectly, or changed without updating the related work, the routine may faithfully support the wrong plan. The process needs an owner for entering and verifying critical dates, a method for handling changes, and evidence that the adjustment reached the work and communication it affects. Separate work ownership from decision ownership. Many teams struggle with delegation because a task is assigned without defining the decision. A transaction coordinator may own requesting a document, scheduling a standard reminder, updating a portal, or confirming receipt. The agent may own advice, negotiation, contract interpretation, strategy, and sensitive client conversations. A marketing coordinator may own preparing listing materials, while the agent approves positioning, pricing language, and claims. A routine may prepare or schedule work, while a person reviews the final message. The process should identify both types of ownership. Work ownership answers who completes the repeatable action. Decision ownership answers who is responsible when the situation requires judgment or an exception. Without that distinction, the team either interrupts the owner for everything or makes decisions without appropriate authority. An escalation path should explain what qualifies as an exception, who needs to know, what information should be prepared, and how quickly the decision is needed. Ask Mark is not an escalation system. When the inspection identifies a health, safety, structural, or high-cost concern, prepare the report section, client goals, relevant deadline, and open questions for the agent's review before the scheduled decision call. Gives the owner a prepared decision instead of an interruption without context. Client communication belongs inside the process. Communication should not be treated as a separate layer added after the internal work is complete. The clients need to understand a milestone is part of completing the milestone. A photography appointment is not fully prepared if the seller does not know what must be ready. An inspection step is not complete if the buyer does not understand what happens after the report. A closing process is not complete if the client is unsure about timing, documents, funds, keys, or possession. At every major stage, decide what the client is likely to wonder, what they need to know now, what action they may need to take, who should communicate, and when the communication will be most useful. Some communication can be prepared from an approved standard. Some can be sent automatically after a clear logistical event. Some should become a personal call because the moment includes advice, emotion, risk, or a meaningful decision. The communication record should remain connected to the person and the active property, listing, or transaction when appropriate. This gives the business a history of what was sent, what was promised, what questions were asked, and what still needs attention. A portal can improve visibility when it contains accurate dates, resources, milestones, and updates, but the portal should support communication rather than become an excuse not to communicate. Build for exceptions without letting them control the system. The common process should continue automatically or predictably until a condition requires a different path. Examples include a contract falling through, a closing date changing, an inspection creating a serious concern, an appraisal issue, a client becoming unresponsive, a vendor missing a commitment, a property failing to meet the launch standard, or a decision maker changing direction. The system should make the exception visible and protect the work that should stop, change, or be reviewed. If a transaction terminates, closing communications and future transaction tasks should not continue as if nothing happened. If a listing date changes, the preparation and launch sequence should adjust. If the client requests a different communication method, the process should respect it. A rigid routine that cannot recognize a changed state can create more damage than a missing reminder. Not every exception needs a complex automated branch. The first version may simply pause the normal path, create a review task, prepare the relevant context, and notify the decision owner. That is still a dependable system because it identifies where judgment begins. Use SAM as the connected operational record. SAM can connect contacts and relationships to properties, listings, transactions, projects, repairs, activities, important dates, communications, routines, and client-facing portal information available in the account. The value comes from using the right record for the right truth. The property represents the enduring real estate asset. A listing represents the marketing engagement and its status. A transaction represents the contract and closing work. A project or repair can organize related operational work. The contact records preserve the people and relationships involved. When those records are connected, the process can use real milestones rather than a collection of detached tasks. The business can review an active file and understand the people, property, stage, dates, messages, work, and next action. All can assist with summaries, draft updates, checklist language, and preparation. Where available, intelligence may help surface incomplete next steps, unanswered questions, slipping commitments, or unusual gaps. The agent and responsible team members still verify the facts and make the professional decisions. Measure reliability before efficiency. The first question is not whether the routine saved time. The first question is whether the work became more dependable. Useful operational evidence includes critical dates entered and verified, active files with a current stage and owner, milestones with a visible next action, client updates delivered as promised, tasks completed before they became urgent, exceptions escalated with context, and fewer repeated questions caused by missing information. After reliability improves, the business can examine efficiency. It may find duplicate entry, repeated searches, unnecessary approvals, communication that can be prepared, or tasks that a routine can create. Removing steps before the standard is dependable can make the process faster while making the outcome less clear. Review the work with the people who perform it. Ask where they still wait for the owner, where the information is hard to find, which tasks do not make sense, which messages feel wrong, and which exceptions occur frequently enough to deserve a defined path. A good operation becomes easier to use because the people and evidence improve it over time. Operations fieldwork. Build one milestone system. Choose one repeated milestone from an active buyer, seller, listing, transaction, project, or closing process. Good starting points include a signed agreement, photography scheduled, listing launched, offer accepted, inspection scheduled, appraisal ordered, closing confirmed, or transaction closed. Use a milestone that occurs often enough to test and creates several connected actions. Define the entrance and desired outcome. Name the exact event that starts the milestone and what must be true before this part of the process is considered complete. Map the common work. Identify the actions that occur in most cases. Separate actions from decisions and note which work can begin immediately. Assign work and decision ownership. Name who completes each repeatable action, who approves sensitive work, and who handles exceptions. Give each owner the information and authority required. Connect timing to real dates. Identify which important dates or status changes should start, adjust, or stop the work. Decide who verifies those dates and what happens when they change. Design the client communication. Write what the client should know, feel, and do at this milestone. Decide which communication can be prepared, which can be automated safely, and which should be personal. Define the exception boundary. Name the conditions that should pause the common path or require review. Keep the first list focused on common, meaningful exceptions. Choose the evidence. Decide what the business should be able to see afterward. This may include verified dates, completed work, approved communication, a client response, a change status, or an escalated decision. Test with one active file. Put the smallest useful version into SAM and observe it through the milestone. Ask the person performing the work and the client-facing agent what remained unclear. The system is improving when the next milestone becomes visible before it is urgent. The responsible person can act without searching for basic context. The client knows what to expect, and the owner is brought in for judgment rather than routine reminders. That is the point where operations begins supporting the owner instead of borrowing reliability from the owner. The R in C.O.R.E. Retention. Continue the relationship with a reason. Most real estate agents understand that past clients are important. The problem is rarely belief. The problem is that the relationship leaves the active transaction process without a dependable next step. The client receives a closing gift or thank you message, the file is marked complete, and attention moves to the next lead or transaction. Months later, the agent knows they should reconnect but has to decide whom to call, why the call would matter, what happened previously, and what to say. Retention is the system that prevents a valuable relationship from becoming an old record. It preserves appropriate context, creates useful reasons for future contact, and helps the agent remain present without making every message a request for business. A retention system should make the agent more thoughtful, not simply more frequent. The long-term goal is not to keep the agent's name in front of everyone at all times. It is to remain useful enough that the relationship is easy to continue when a real estate question, life change, referral opportunity, or future move occurs. That requires more than a campaign. It requires the business to remember the person, the property, the relationship, and the reason the next contact should happen. Retention begins before the closing. The closing process should prepare the relationship for what comes next. Waiting until after the transaction is complete often means important information is already scattered across messages, transaction documents, notes, and the agent's memory. The business should decide what needs to be confirmed while the relationship is still active and the context is easy to verify. That includes accurate names, contact information, spouse or partner relationships, household connections, communication preferences, the property and transaction history, the original source, important dates, relevant goals, and any promises that extend beyond closing. It may also include the reason for the move, future property plans, family or employment changes, investment interests, vendor needs, or another detail the client willingly shared and the business has a legitimate reason to retain. Not every personal detail belongs in a database. The standard should respect privacy, relevance, and the client's expectations. Sensitive information that is not necessary for service should not be collected merely because it may be useful later. The goal is to preserve enough appropriate context to continue the relationship well, not to create an unnecessary personal archive. Before the transaction is marked complete, the business should also decide the first post-closing action. That action should have a reason, owner, and timing. A general instruction to stay in touch is not enough. The first step may be a closing follow-through call, a review of unfinished questions, a check on the move, a home care resource, a reminder connected to the property, or preparation for a future annual real estate review. The reason should make sense to the client, not only to the agent's marketing plan. Build the relationship record, not just the contact record. A contact record tells the business how to reach a person. A relationship record helps the business understand how that person connects to the agent, household, property, other people, and prior work. That difference becomes increasingly important over time. Suppose the agent helped a married couple purchase a home. If the records are not connected, the business may send duplicate messages, use the wrong greeting, remember one spouse's preferences but not the other's, or fail to recognize that a future inquiry belongs to an existing household. If the purchase is connected only to the transaction and not to the enduring property and people, the history may be difficult to use after the file is closed. SAM can support contact relationships, spouse or partner connections, addresses, properties, listings, transactions, history, communication, tags or segments, important dates, routines, call lists, and other account-specific information. The retention system should decide which details are critical to maintaining the relationship and who confirms them. A field is useful only when the business knows why it is being maintained and how it will affect future service. The original source should remain visible because it is part of the relationship story. A client referred by a family member, past client, professional partner, or community connection should not become disconnected from that source after closing. Preserving the source allows the business to acknowledge the people who helped create the relationship and understand how trust entered the conversation. Replace random touches with relationship standards. Many retention plans begin with a target number of touches per year. Frequency can help with consistency, but it is not a strategy by itself. 12 generic messages do not automatically create a stronger relationship than 4 timely, useful contacts. The business should first decide what kinds of value it is prepared to provide and which relationships need different standards. Some communication serves the whole database. A useful market explanation, community update, homeowner resource, or local events newsletter may be appropriate for a broad group when the content fits their interests and permission. Other communication should be based on a segment, property, neighborhood, life stage, investment interest, or prior goal. The most meaningful contact is often individual. A personal call, handwritten note, specific introduction, response to a life event, or conversation connected to something the agent genuinely remembers. Automation can support consistency, but the relationship should not sound as if it is being processed. Routines may help schedule a future review, prepare a message, place someone on a call list, remind the agent of a home anniversary, or trigger a useful homeowner touch. All may help summarize the relationship history, prepare talking points, or draft a message in an approved voice. The agent should still decide whether the moment calls for a personal conversation, a prepared communication, or no contact at all. A strong standard distinguishes prepared from personal. Prepared means the system gathers context or creates a useful starting point. Personal means the agent responds as a person who knows the relationship. Those two are not in conflict. Better preparation often makes the personal contact more specific and less awkward. Give the annual real estate review a purpose. An annual review is useful when it helps the client make sense of something they care about. It should not be a disguised request for a listing appointment or referral. The business should define what the client receives from the conversation and why it is worth their time. Depending on the relationship and market, the review may include an updated understanding of property value, equity, neighborhood activity, ownership goals, possible improvements, investment considerations, changing household needs, tax or insurance questions that require other professionals, or a future move the client is beginning to consider. The agent does not need to provide advice outside their expertise. The value may come from helping the client organize the questions and connect the real estate implications to a longer-term plan. The system should prepare the agent before offering the review. It can bring forward the property, purchase history, prior goals, relevant communication, known improvements, and questions to verify. The invitation should explain the benefit rather than asking for a vague catch-up meeting. After the review, the business should record the decisions, future timing, useful introductions, and next action. Recognize repeat and referral signals without forcing them. Referrals are often requested because a campaign says it is time to ask, not because the conversation created a natural reason. A better retention system helps the agent recognize when trust and context make an introduction appropriate. A client may praise the service, mention a friend with a real estate question, discuss a family member moving nearby, or ask how the market affects someone they know. The agent can respond helpfully and make it easy for the client to connect the people when they choose. The system can prepare the agent with relationship history and remind them to follow through on a promised introduction or thank you. It should also preserve the connection between the referring person and the new opportunity. The new lead enters conversion with context rather than being treated like an unknown registration. Repeat business signals may appear as property searches, home value questions, investment discussions, renovation plans, family changes, employment moves, retirement, estate needs, or a request for a professional resource. Where available and properly configured, intelligence may help surface stale relationships, missed commitments, or activity that deserves review. It should not assume that every signal is a sales opportunity. A person confirms the meaning and chooses the appropriate response. Reactivate with honesty and relevance. Most databases contain people the agent has not contacted for a long time. The longer the silence, the more tempting it is to avoid the conversation or send a generic message that pretends no time has passed. Reactivation works better when the business is honest about the gap and has a real reason to reconnect. Begin by identifying who the person is, how the relationship began, what history exists, whether the contact information is still valid, and what value the business can offer now. A past client, old lead, professional connection, and imported contact should not receive the same approach. The agent may acknowledge that it has been too long, ask a sincere question, share something relevant, or offer a useful review. The message should not invent familiarity the relationship did not have. The first goal is not an appointment. It is to reestablish accurate context and permission for the relationship to continue. Record what is learned, update the relationship, and create a next step only when there is a reason. A smaller number of genuine reconnections is more valuable than a large reactivation blast that creates activity the business is not prepared to handle. Measure relationship continuity. Retention should not be judged only by how many emails were sent. Useful evidence includes closings with a completed relationship handoff, past clients with accurate household and property context, relationships with a meaningful future action, annual reviews offered and completed, personal contacts prepared with relevant history, promises followed through, referrals connected to their source, repeat opportunities returned to conversion with context, and relationships intentionally paused when contact is no longer appropriate. Repeat and referral business may be a long-term result, but it should not be promised as an automatic outcome of a campaign. The business controls the consistency and quality of its relationship work. Clients control whether, when, and how they return or refer. The retention system creates the conditions for trust and usefulness to continue. Retention field work. Design 1 year after closing. Choose a recent closing that represents the kind of relationship the business wants to continue. Review the real contact, household, property, transaction, messages, notes, and promises. Then design the next year using the client's likely needs rather than a generic touch calendar. Complete the closing handoff. Confirm the people, relationships, property, source, communication preferences, appropriate personal context, unfinished commitments, and first post-closing action. Define the relationship purpose. Write why staying connected would be useful to this client. Identify the real estate, property, community, or relationship value the business can continue to provide. Choose the contact types. Separate broad, useful communication, segment-specific value, prepared personal contact, and moments that require the agent's direct voice. Create the annual review standard. Define what the client would receive, what information should be prepared, how the invitation explains the value, and what outcomes should be recorded. Identify meaningful triggers. Choose dates, property events, relationship changes, prior goals, or other conditions that should bring the person forward for review. Do not collect sensitive information without a legitimate service reason. Put the next actions into SAM. Add the smallest useful set of future actions, reasons, timing, and ownership. Use routines, call lists, messages, or manual review where they fit the approved standard. Review the experience from the client's point of view. Ask whether the contact would feel useful and informed or repetitive and promotional. Remove any touch that exists only to reach a frequency target. The retention system is improving when closing naturally creates the next relationship step. The agent can prepare without searching through old files, and future contact begins with a reason that makes sense to both the business and the client. The relationship no longer disappears simply because the transaction is finished. The E in C.O.R.E. Experiences. Design clarity into every stage. Experience is what the client believes is happening while the business performs the work. Two businesses can complete the same technical tasks and create very different experiences. One client feels prepared, remembered, and confident. Another feels uncertain, has to request updates, repeats information, and wonders whether something has gone wrong. The difference is often not effort. It is whether the process was designed from the client's point of view. Experience does not sit at the end of C.O.R.E. as a collection of gifts and surprises. It surrounds conversion, operations, and retention. It is created in the first response, the consultation, the handoff, the explanation before an important decision, the silence between milestones, the way a problem is handled, the closing, and the reason the business stays in touch afterward. A gift can strengthen a good experience, but it cannot repair an unclear process. A client portal can improve visibility, but it cannot help if the information is incomplete. An automated message can create consistency, but it can damage trust if it arrives in the wrong tone or at a moment that needed a personal call. Experience is not an item the business sends. It is the result of how the entire system behaves around a person. Find the moments of uncertainty. Clients often become uncertain at transitions. They have completed one step, but they do not yet understand the next one. A lead submits a request and wonders whether anyone received it. A seller signs an agreement and wonders what must happen before photography. A buyer's offer is accepted, and the excitement is quickly followed by questions about inspection, earnest money, financing, and what could go wrong. A client receives an inspection report and sees dozens of issues without knowing which ones matter. A transaction approaches closing, and the client is unsure about funds, keys, utilities, walkthrough, and possession. The business may know that the situation is normal, but the client does not have the same experience or context. Silence allows the client to fill the gap with assumptions. Frequent communication does not automatically solve the problem if it does not answer the question the client is actually asking. To find experience gaps, listen for repeated questions. Did you get my message? Suggests an acknowledgement or ownership gap. What happens now? Suggests a transition gap. Are we still on track? Suggests a progress visibility gap. Who should I contact? Suggests an ownership gap. Why did I receive this? Suggests a relevance or timing problem. I already told someone that. Suggests context was lost in a handoff. The goal is not to prevent every question. questions are part of good service. The goal is to prevent avoidable uncertainty and prepare the business to answer the questions that require judgment. Designed for what the client should know, feel, and do. At each important moment, define 3 outcomes. First, what should the client know? This includes the facts, timing, responsibilities, choices, and what is normal. Second, how should the client reasonably feel after the interaction? The business cannot control every emotion, but it can aim for informed, prepared, heard, and clear rather than surprised, ignored, or confused. Third, what should the client do next? The action may be providing information, reviewing a document, making a decision, preparing the property, attending an appointment, or simply knowing that the business owns the next step. These outcomes create a better communication standard than send an update. For example, after a seller's photography appointment is scheduled, the client should know the date, preparation expectations, access plan, what the photographer will do, what happens if the property is not ready, and when the listing team will follow up. The client should feel prepared rather than judged. The client's next action should be specific enough that the property can meet the agreed readiness standard. The standard should also define what the business owns. Clients should not be given a list of instructions without knowing what the agent or team will do in return. Experience improves when responsibility is shared clearly. Here is what we need from you. Here is what we are doing. Here is when you will hear from us. And here is who to contact if something changes. Set expectations before the gap appears. Expectation setting is one of the most effective experience systems because it changes how the client interprets the time between events. If a buyer knows the inspection report may look alarming, understands when the agent will review it, and has a scheduled time for the decision conversation, the waiting period feels different. If a seller knows how showing feedback is gathered, when it will be discussed, and why some buyers may not provide useful feedback, silence does not automatically feel like neglect. An expectation should be specific enough to guide the client, but honest enough to allow for uncertainty. The business should not promise a response, result, price, timeline, or outcome it cannot control. It can promise its own behavior, when it will review, when it will communicate, what it will prepare, how it will handle a change, and who will take responsibility. The expectation should be captured where the team can honor it. A promise made during consultation should move into operations. A preferred communication method should affect future messages. A client who wants a weekly update on Friday should not receive an internal note that nobody sees. Experience depends on the business carrying its promises forward. Choose the right channel and level of human involvement. The fastest channel is not always the best channel. A logistical confirmation may be ideal for text. A detailed explanation may work better by email or inside a portal where the client can review it. A complex decision may require a call or meeting. A thoughtful handwritten note or supported direct mail touch may matter because it is personal and unexpected. Where available and configured, SAM can help the business use communication history, preferred channels, templates, routines, portal resources, member voice information, and integrated services such as handwritten communication support. And the system should decide the channel based on the purpose, sensitivity, urgency, client preference, and need for discussion. Automation is well suited to predictable logistics and preparation. Human communication is needed when the client may have questions. The message includes advice. The situation has changed. The person is emotional, or the relationship moment deserves more care than a standard message can provide. All can help prepare a clear explanation, summarize prior questions, or adapt approved language to available context. The person reviewing the communication should confirm facts, tone, timing, and whether the message should be sent at all. A draft that sounds polished but overlooks the client's concern is not a better experience. Make handoffs feel like continuity. Clients should not feel the business's organizational chart. When responsibility moves from the lead response owner to the agent, from the agent to a listing coordinator, or from the transaction process into retention, the client should understand who is involved and why. The new person should begin with the context already shared rather than asking the client to start over. A thoughtful handoff explains what has been completed, what happens next, who now owns the work, how the original agent remains involved, and when the client will hear from the next person. Internally, the handoff should carry goals, concerns, promises, preferences, decision makers, unresolved questions, and the next action. Externally, it should feel like the same business continuing to serve. Portals can help clients see milestones, dates, resources, updates, and next steps when the content is accurate and intentionally selected. The portal should answer common questions and reduce searching. It should not expose internal notes or unnecessary information, and it should not become a substitute for personal communication at meaningful moments. Design the recovery experience. Even a strong system will encounter delays, mistakes, missed expectations, vendor problems, difficult negotiations, and situations the business cannot control. Experience is often shaped more by the response to a problem than by the absence of problems. A recovery standard should make ownership clear. The business should acknowledge what happened, explain what is known, avoid guessing, identify what it is doing next, provide realistic timing, and follow through. The client should not have to contact several people to find someone willing to own the issue. Internal blame may need to be addressed later, but it does not help the client understand the solution. Technology can surface the communication history, open commitments, dates, and people involved. All may help organize a factual summary or prepare a starting draft. The responsible person should handle the actual conversation when trust, accountability, or judgment is involved. Recovery should never be delegated to an automated apology that cannot understand what the client experienced. Use feedback to improve the process. Feedback should do more than produce a testimonial. The business should ask where the client felt especially prepared, where they felt uncertain, which explanation helped, which step was harder than expected, and what they wish they had known earlier. That information can reveal a process gap even when the final result was successful. The business should connect feedback to the moment that created it. If several buyers say the inspection period felt overwhelming, review the expectation, preparation, timing, and decision conversation. If sellers repeatedly ask when they will receive showing feedback, review the showing and reporting standard. If clients praise one team member for clear updates, study what that person does and decide whether it should become part of the business standard. Not every preference should become a universal process. Feedback is evidence to review, not a command to add more steps. The owner should decide whether the issue was common, meaningful, and within the business's control. Then improve one part and test it again. Measure clarity and confidence. Experience measurement should look beyond satisfaction scores. Useful evidence includes response expectations met, handoffs completed with context, clients receiving milestone explanations before they ask, portal information kept current, communication preferences honored, unanswered questions surfaced, complaints owned and resolved, and feedback connected to a process improvement. Repeated client questions are also evidence. A reduction in avoidable "what happens next" calls may show that expectations are clearer. That does not mean the business should try to eliminate conversation. It means the conversations can focus on decisions, advice, and the client's situation instead of repairing preventable confusion. Experience fieldwork. Redesign one uncertain moment. Choose one repeated moment where clients often ask questions, appear worried, delay a decision, or contact the business for status. Use a real moment from conversion, operations, or retention rather than inventing a general experience goal. Write the client's question in their words. Avoid internal terms. Capture what the person is likely to be wondering, fearing, or trying to decide. Define what they should know, feel, and do. Identify the useful information, the reasonable emotional outcome, and the client's next action. Also, identify what the business owns. Set the expectation earlier. Determine whether part of the uncertainty can be prevented during consultation, onboarding, a prior milestone, or the handoff into this stage. Choose the communication and channel. Decide what should be prepared, what can be automated safely, and what requires a person. Respect the client's preference and the sensitivity of the moment. Carry the context. Identify the facts, prior questions, promises, and preferences the person or AI needs to prepare the communication well. Define the recovery path. Decide what happens when the timing changes, the message is missed, the client remains uncertain, or the situation becomes an exception. Test and ask. Use the improved process with a real client when appropriate. Ask whether the communication helped them understand what was happening and what would have made it clearer. The experience is improving when the client receives the right information before uncertainty grows, understands who owns the next step, and feels that the business remembers the relationship rather than simply processing the transaction. The client should experience one prepared business, even when several people and systems help deliver the work. Routines connect the business. Turn a decision into repeatable action. A routine is not the strategy. It is the mechanism that carries a strategy after the business has decided what should happen. That distinction matters because it is possible to build an impressive automation that performs the wrong action, uses the wrong timing, or continues after the situation has changed. The routine is only as dependable as the business decisions inside it. In SAM, routines can support work associated with contacts, properties, listings, transactions, and other available records and conditions. Depending on the action, configuration, and integration, a routine may create an activity, prepare or send a message, add someone to a call list, update information, initiate a webhook, send a notification, or begin another part of a process. Actions may be designed for automatic completion or for manual review when a person should remain involved. The goal is not to automate the greatest number of steps. The goal is to remove unnecessary dependence on memory while protecting judgment, relationships, and the ability to respond when real life does not follow the standard path. Start with a meaningful trigger. A trigger should represent a real change in the business. A new inquiry was received, an agreement was signed, a listing date was selected, an offer was accepted, an inspection was scheduled, a transaction closed, a home anniversary is approaching. The trigger gives the process a reliable starting point. Weak triggers require interpretation. A tag named follow-up may mean different things to different people. A manually created date may never be added. A status may remain unchanged after the relationship has moved forward. Before using a trigger, decide who or what creates it, which record holds it, what information must be present, and how the business will know it is accurate. The trigger should also be narrow enough that the action makes sense whenever it occurs. If a routine starts for every new contact, it may treat a vendor, agent, past client, cold lead, referral, and active client the same way. A better trigger includes enough condition to identify the business situation the routine was designed to support. Define the outcome before the actions. It is easy to begin a routine by listing messages and tasks. Begin instead with what should be different when the routine has done its job. After a new inquiry, the desired outcome may be that the person receives the promised resource, the lead is assigned, the source and intent are visible, and a first response action is due. After an accepted offer, the desired outcome may be that the critical dates are verified, the appropriate people are notified, the client understands what comes next, and the common transaction work has begun. The outcome protects the process from unnecessary activity. If an action does not help create the outcome, it may not belong. If the outcome cannot be observed, the business will have difficulty deciding whether the routine worked. Give every action ownership, timing, and context. An action should answer more than what to do. It should identify who owns it, when it is useful, and what the owner needs to complete it well. Call the client is weak. Call the seller by 4 p.m. after the inspection report is received to review the decision timeline using the report link, seller priorities, response deadline, and unresolved questions provides a usable assignment. The owner can be a person, role, or system action, but the responsibility should not be ambiguous. If a message is prepared by AI and requires approval, somebody owns the review. If a task is assigned to an assistant, but the decision belongs to the agent, the escalation should be defined. If a routine sends an approved logistical message automatically, the business owns the content and the conditions under which it is allowed to send. Timing should follow the business moment. Some actions are immediate. Others should wait for a date, delay, response, stage change, or prior action. More communication is not always better. The best timing is when the action helps the person understand or move forward without creating unnecessary noise. Context should travel with the action. That may include source, property, stage, prior communication, client preference, reason for contact, approved explanation, deadline, or an open commitment. AI and future grounded knowledge support become more useful when the job and context are clear. Without context, automation creates activity that someone must still interpret. Add conditions, stops, and human review. Every routine should know when it no longer applies. A no response sequence should stop or change when the person replies. A nurture path should change when an appointment is scheduled. A listing preparation routine should adjust when the launch date changes. A closing sequence should stop if the transaction terminates. A retention routine should respect a communication preference or request to stop. Conditions prevent a standard action from continuing through a changed situation. The first version does not need a branch for every possible exception. It does need a safe way to stop, pause, or ask a person to review when the common path is no longer true. Human review should be tied to specific risk and relationship boundaries. Advice, negotiation, sensitive communication, legal or contractual concerns, complaints, emotionally difficult moments, and unusual exceptions should remain visible to a responsible person. Routine logistical work can often proceed within an approved standard. The owner should be able to explain why each automated action is safe and why each review point needs a person. Confirm and improve. Completion is part of the system. The business should be able to see that the activity was completed, the message was approved or sent, the field or stage changed, the client responded, the exception was escalated, or the desired outcome was reached. A routine that creates work without a way to review the result can hide failure behind activity. Begin with one real record and watch the routine operate. Confirm the trigger occurred when expected. The right owner received the work, timing made sense, the context was available, the communication fit, the stopping conditions worked, and the evidence remained visible. Ask the person doing the work what was still unclear. Then change one part and test again. Do not build the full process before the common path has been proven. A smaller routine is easier to understand, easier to correct, and safer to expand. Reliability grows through decisions, tests, and evidence rather than the number of actions on the screen. The one process system card. Put one important process on a single page. The system card is a decision document. It should be completed before building or substantially changing a routine. Its purpose is to make the process clear enough that the owner, implementation partner, coach, or system builder can understand what the business intends and how the first test will be judged. Use one specific process. Lead follow-up is too broad. First response and no response handling for Facebook seller guide requests is specific enough to test. Transaction management is too broad. Seller accepted offer handoff through inspection scheduling gives the process a useful boundary. Write what is true and what has been decided. Do not fill the card with language that sounds professional but leaves the action unclear. If the business has not made a decision, write decision needed and name who should make it. That is more useful than allowing an assumption to become an automation. Process identity. Process name. What specific part of the business are we improving? Core area. Is the primary purpose conversion, operations, retention, or experience? Which connected area receives the handoff? Current problem. What currently depends on memory, creates risk, interrupts the owner, or causes client uncertainty? Process design. Starting event. What observable event or condition begins the process? Desired outcome. What must be visibly true when this process has worked? Normal path. What are the smallest repeatable actions required to create the outcome? Work owner, who completes each repeatable action? Decision owner, who handles judgment, approval, advice, and exceptions? Timing, when should each action occur and which date, delay, response, or milestone controls it? Required context, which facts, history, preferences, knowledge, and prior commitments are needed? Client communication. What should the client know, feel, and do? Which channel and level of human involvement fit the moment? Exception boundary. Which conditions should pause, stop, change, or escalate the normal path? Technology and evidence. SAM support. Which record, stage, important date, routine, activity, message, call list, portal item, field update, or available integration should support the process? AI and intelligence support. What can be prepared, summarized, organized, or noticed? Which capability is available now, which varies by account, and which represents product direction? Human approval. What must a person verify or decide before the work continues? Evidence. What will prove that the action occurred and the intended result was reached? First test. Which real contact, client, property, listing, transaction, or past client will be used? Next improvement. After the test, what is the one change most likely to make the process more reliable? The 7-day systems test. Build small, test with real work, improve what you learn. The 7-day systems test is designed to move one process from an idea into observable business use. The goal is not to finish a large automation in a week. The goal is to make one next step more dependable and learn what the process needs before expanding it. Day 1, choose the process and evidence. Select one repeated process that creates real stress, risk, delay, opportunity loss, or client uncertainty. Define the desired outcome and the evidence that would show improvement. Keep the boundary small enough to test with current business activity. Day 2, observe what actually happens. Review recent records and follow the process as it works today. Identify where the information lives, who notices the work, how ownership is assigned, what the client receives, and where the owner steps in. Do not redesign yet. Capture the current truth, including workarounds. Day 3, make the business decisions. Complete the system card. Define the trigger, outcome, normal path, owners, timing, required context, communication, exception boundary, human approval, and evidence. Resolve the first unclear decision before opening the software. Day 4, build the smallest useful version in SAM. Use the appropriate records, stages, important dates, activities, routines, messages, call lists, portal information, or available integrations to support the common path. Include only the actions needed for the first test. Keep sensitive communication and judgment under human review. Day 5, test with real work. Use a real record that appropriately fits the process. Watch what starts, what is assigned, what information appears, what communication is prepared, and what still depends on memory. Do not assume that the process worked because no error appeared. Day 6, review the evidence. Compare what happened with the desired outcome. Ask the person performing the work where they hesitated, searched, waited, or needed approval. Review the client-facing result for accuracy, timing, clarity, and tone. Identify whether the problem came from the decision, data, trigger, ownership, timing, context, communication, condition, or evidence. Day 7, improve one part and test again. Make the smallest correction that addresses the evidence. Change one trigger, action, owner, date, message, context requirement, stopping condition, or approval boundary. Use another appropriate record or the next real occurrence to verify the change. Record what the business learned so the same issue does not have to be rediscovered. At the end of the week, do not ask whether the process is perfect. Ask whether the next step is easier to see, easier to own, better prepared, and less dependent on memory. If the answer is yes, the business has a working foundation. Continue testing before adding complexity. What happens next? One useful system is the beginning. If this guide helped you identify one process that depends too heavily on memory, you have already found useful work. Complete the system card, put the smallest version into SAM, and test it honestly. A business becomes more dependable one clear decision and one proven process at a time. The larger opportunity is connecting those processes across the entire client journey. Positioning should guide who enters conversion. Conversion should preserve the promises and context operations needs. Operations should deliver dependable service and prepare the relationship for retention. Retention should carry trust and history into future repeat and referral opportunities. Experience should improve how people understand and move through every one of those stages. Routines should carry the approved next actions, while people remain responsible for judgment and relationships. Built on C.O.R.E, is a 16-week coached implementation program for real estate business owners using SAM. It is not a screen-by-screen software class, and it is not a done-for-you setup service. The program provides the structure, weekly teaching, private coaching, fieldwork, templates, evidence review, accountability, and implementation support required to turn business decisions into systems that operate with real contacts, leads, clients, listings, transactions, and past clients. Participants work through their positioning, ideal clients, database, lead magnets, capture and distribution, first response, consultation, nurture, activation, buyer and seller delivery, transaction and closing processes, retention, and intentional client experience. Each week builds on approved work from the prior week. The goal is not to install a collection of generic automations. It is to create a connected business system that reflects the owner's market, clients, standards, voice, team, and life. Each cohort is limited to 10 businesses. Enrollment includes the owner plus one additional participant. To learn more and apply, visit Workflow, secrets.ai/built-on-core. Feature availability may vary by account, integration, and configuration. SAM intelligence references describe capabilities that may not be available in every account. SAM brain references in this guide describe product direction and should not be interpreted as a promise of a currently released feature. Results depend on the business decisions, implementation, testing, follow-through, market, clients, and other conditions outside the program's control. A private place to learn, build, and show the work. Built on core participants use a private portal for weekly lessons, fieldwork, evidence, replay access, coaching feedback, progress, and the business blueprint created through the program. Future weeks remain closed until the scheduled release, so the cohort works through the decisions in sequence. The portal supports the work, but completion is based on implementation. Participants attend the live session or review the replay, complete the critical path, test with real business activity, submit evidence, and use coaching to resolve the decision or block that prevents the system from moving forward. Ready to build the system with coaching? Learn more and apply at workflowsecrets.ai/built-on-core.